Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever felt there's more to your health, fitness, and human spirit than meets the eye, then do we have the What Doesn't Kill Us show for you. Today I'll be talking with Scott Carney, investigative journalist, anthropologist, and author of a fantastic paradigm-busting book and journey, What Doesn't Kill Us. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about how freezing water, extreme altitude, and environmental conditioning can renew our lost evolutionary strength. Oh, goody. That plus we'll talk about climbing mountains in shorts, dancing indoors in the rain, why you don't want to go floppy, brown fat over white, breathless push-ups, a mutiny on a mountain, Spartan races, eating tapeworms, a mental umbrella, and what in the world Turritopsis sterni, if I get that even close, the so-called immortal jellyfish has to do with anything.
That's like the best introduction I've had in ages.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show, Scott. Are you ready to shine?
I am ready to shine. I got the light right on me. Look at all that shine.
Woohoo! So before we dive right into things, I got to ask, you mentioned if you had a spirit animal, why would it probably be or would have been a jellyfish?
Because the jellyfish is the first creature in our evolutionary past to have all of its needs met by its environment. It lives in a sea of perpetual comfort. And the Turritopsis dorini, which you just mentioned, doesn't even have to think about dying. When it gets close to dying, it just shrivels up into a ball and then gets reborn as a juvenile version of itself. It would be awesome to be a jellyfish. But, as I say in the book, too bad that we are not amorphous blobs of sea goop. Instead, we're humans, the product of billions of years of evolution since the jellyfish started. And we have this body where we still thrive for comfort. We still thrive for this. We want this homeostasis, and we want this comfort, and we search for it. But we live in an environment which has variations, and that we need to also accept that there's variations. And what I say in the book is that we're the first animals since the jellyfish that have completely controlled our environment. So we live in a perpetual summer of 72 degrees. Doesn't matter if it's a blizzard outside or a scorching summer day. We have the technology to insulate ourselves with this cocoon of comfort, and that's not good for us.
Yeah, that's exactly, as you're going through that, and I'm hearing comfort and cocoon and insulation and control. What I'm actually hearing is we may have controlled, in a sense, our external environment, but it means now our internal environments, our body, our health, our mental well-being are going out of control.
Exactly. You know, our species, Homo sapiens sapien, who we are, we're about 200,000 years old. And in that time, you know, when we were in the equatorial regions of Africa, even there where it's pretty warm, we had to deal with variations between day and night. You know, you'd be sleeping on the ground, it'd get down to 50 degrees. And when was the last time you slept in 50 degrees? Probably not recently. And their bodies and our bodies had to be adaptable in order to survive. And those changes were always there. They never sort of went away. And as we left Africa, we went through the Middle East, we colonized Europe, through Asia, we made it to the New World somehow. And our bodies were the most sophisticated technology that we had available. We had we had sailboats eventually, we had fur skin boots, we had fire, of course, but we didn't have even a whisper of what we would consider modern technology. And it was our bodies the body's ability to adapt to extreme environments that let us populate the world. And what I'm saying in this book is that because we've insulated ourselves so much from those natural variations in pursuit of this ideal of comfort, that we are getting weaker. And that biology, which is designed to adapt, that has to adapt, isn't doing it anymore. And we need to get out there and give it stimulus.
Thank you for sharing. We had an investigative journalist on earlier this year talking about the history of Thanksgiving and how we had, we came over from England and here we are in the New World, brutal winter, something like 2/3 of us wiped out. And here comes this Native American who you talk about in your book, Samoset, if I'm pronouncing that even close to correct. He shows up in a loincloth and he's like, hi, how are you doing? Because he was more in connection, in touch with the natural environment, and therefore much more able to survive.
He was. And, the first thing that he said, Samoset, who knows how it's pronounced? All we have are the written ledgers by the pilgrims, right? But Samoset showed up in Cape Cod wearing just a loincloth. And the first thing he said to the pilgrims was, "Welcome, welcome, Englishmen. Do you have any beer?" Like, this is how, these are Puritans, right? They didn't have any beer. They were not into that. And that's how much the disconnect was between them. And Samoset learned English for a long, complicated reason. He was kidnapped when he was a child and learned English. But the interesting thing is that he was just in a loincloth. He's in the middle of the Cape Cod winter, and the pilgrims are all huddled up in their coats. And the first thing they do after saying, "No, we don't have any beer," is give him a coat. And he was like, "Sure, thanks for the coat. Who doesn't want to be a little warmer?" But the Algonquin Indians in that time would take their babies and in the winter and put them in snowbanks outside of their houses, and they'd not keep them there so long that they would die, right? It would be like 15 minutes in the snowbanks, and then they bring them back inside in these incredibly warm structures that they maintained. And the reason they did that is because by giving the children's bodies the stimulus of cold, that those bodies had to adapt through adulthood and develop tissues that would keep them warm in what we would consider extreme environments. And so Samoset didn't mind that he was on Cape Cod in his loincloth. He was like, that's fine. Thanks for the coat, though. That's cool. And that's our founding myth. That's how we got Thanksgiving.
It says a lot. It's interesting. My wife and I, we wrote Barefoot Running years ago, and we run around and play in the snow barefoot. And we read a book, Native Running, almost a turn of the century, the last century book, that talked about Navajos. What they would do with their kids is actually put them in, not just roll them in the snow, but they'd have like a tank of water, like an old barrel of water that they'd chip through the ice and dunk the kids in the water to stimulate the immune system. And now you can see what's been going viral this past year is kids in like Siberia and places going out at midday break and playing almost naked in the snow.
Right. It's amazing. And it's because what you're doing is stimulating this fight or flight response in the body where and this is just sort of a standard thing, that adrenaline rush. If you see a tiger, you have the fight or flight response, and it gives you a boost of energy. And by doing that, you activate all of these unconscious processes in the body. You release adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, various things to give you that boost. And it's regular for animals to have that boost occasion. I mean, I don't know if you have a cat. I have a cat. And
we've got two cats here.
Cat will run outside, and for no reason that's explicable, right? It'll puff up and its tail will get huge, and that is its fight or flight response, and that's a natural response. And obviously, the cat's maybe a little crazy, and who knows why it does it. But that system is not a system that we enjoy very frequently in the Western world. That's a system that we generally say you don't want to be in fight or flight. You want to be calm. You want to be in touch, which is good. But if you never have that experience of fight or flight, you're not exercising these glands, these hormones, these muscles that are responsive and would normally in nature be used.
It's cool when you're putting it that way. What I'm realizing is, so something we talk about on the show a lot is how to get our stress levels down, because we're always in a low-level fight or flight response. But if we actually face something that causes it to truly surge, and then we come back down, it's going to be like hitting the reset button for us.
Exactly. Like, I mean, we get fight or flight because we're worried about our 401ks and these other things, which really are not. I mean, there's consequences and there's stakes, and I don't want to minimize that. But it's not the fight or flight of meeting a tiger, right? It's a whole different thing. And by doing things that give you that real fight or flight response sometimes, and then learning to modulate it at that high level helps you in your daily life too. So that 401k and that constant stress of traffic or whatever else happens during the day hits you in a different way, and it's easier. Now there was a New York Times article that came out quite recently, which was about it was an investment banker who says he starts every day with a cold shower, which is of course something that I advocate. And he says, it's great because you start the day off doing something hard, and then everything else is easy. And a cold shower is hard, but it's not that hard, right? It's not a dangerous stimulus. It's an invigorating stimulus.
No, the only challenge with it is something you talk about in the book, and it's something I do a lot myself, is the only hard part of the cold shower is turning the knob. It's making that decision of, okay, here we go.
Oh my God, that's the hardest thing. I just took a cold shower maybe 20 minutes before we're on, and in this beautiful warm environment, the shower, and you're soaped up, and it's all great. And then okay, we're gonna do it, and just reaching that knob and turning it is the hardest thing. And then you get a little bit of cold, and you're like, okay, and then you control yourself in the cold, and then it feels great. But the deciding to do it is by far the hardest thing.
This fall, I was giving myself an experiment. Since I'm here on the East Coast right now, I've been enjoying swimming in the lakes. And I said, I wonder how long I can swim in the water and let my body adapt naturally to the cold. And I got down probably into the lower 50s, somewhere in that range. And the physiological adaptations were huge. And at that point, driving an hour to throw myself in 50-degree water to then drive back, and the body does this weird response that you talk about in your book when you're in the car, and all of a sudden this wave of cold hits you when you weren't cold in the water.
Right. Afterdrop.
Yeah, the afterdrop. But getting myself to take that step into that water was such a having to psych myself up. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Maybe that's a perfect segue. How did you get into writing this book? Because this wasn't your plan or your path, I don't believe.
No, not originally. So I'm an investigative journalist, write for Wired, Mother Jones, NPR, Playboy, Men's Journal, just really all the big magazines out there. And but I'd had this experience that sort of started my journalism career about now it's probably 12 years ago, where I was an anthropologist. I was in grad school getting my dissertation, doing my dissertation for my PhD, which I never finished, but we'll get to that. And I was leading an abroad program with 12 American college students throughout North India. And I'd lived in North India for a very long time at that point, probably about 3 years by that point. And I took the students to the holy sites. We started in Delhi, Varanasi. We would go up to Dharamsala eventually, but we went to Bodh Gaya, which is the place where the Buddha attained enlightenment about 2,800 years ago. And I'd been studying Tibetan Buddhism for a long time. I'd lived in Tibet for a little while. And we did this retreat, and the leader was a Swiss-German nun, and we went through the Lam Rim, which is sort of the introductory steps to enlightenment meditation. And it was a silent retreat. And in this, we're looking at enlightenment, we're looking at nirvana, we're all these very beautiful, blissful things. And on the last day of the retreat, after it was over, my best student, most beautiful, most together, most sort of driven student, climbs up to the roof of the retreat center and jumps off to her death, committing suicide here. And as the director of the program, I am responsible for bringing her body back home and administering the affairs and the police investigation, all of that stuff. And I read her journal as part of this investigation. And the last words in it were, "I am a bodhisattva," which means I am enlightened. I am basically an angel. And all I have to do is leave my body to get to this next level. And it was shocking to me, as somebody who was a spiritual seeker, to see something so horrible come from this search, from something which is beautiful, which is enlightenment, which is nirvana, which is bliss, right? So how do we get that disconnect between those two things? And the first book I wrote was very material. It comes out of her experience, where I ended up looking at her body, because I had to stay next to her body for 3 days as part of the autopsy and the police report. It was a horrible thing, but it got me to thinking about what is the difference between a living person and the meat that we are made up of. And people were fighting over body parts. It got very dark, and it led me down this investigative path where I started looking at organ trafficking, which is the farthest, darkest thing that can happen when you look at a human body as meat. And I investigated black markets, what I call red markets, for human kidneys and skeletons and hair all around the world. And that's how I started my career as a journalist. But that moment, I kept on coming back to it. I was like, why would this driven, amazing student kill herself? And And I went back to her journal and I started thinking, was this madness? What is this focus on enlightenment? And I began to collect other journals of people who either went mad, ended up in insane asylums, or killed themselves on meditation retreats. And it turned out to be a large group of people. Now, meditation obviously has great benefits, and I'm a huge proponent of them. But we don't talk about the dark side when you get so fixated on this idea of superpowers, of enlightenment, of these things that are it's like in Christianity, if you thought Christianity was only about duplicating fishes and walking on water, you're not understanding Christianity. And some people get caught up in this idea of siddhis, which are like miracles in yoga and meditation and various Eastern traditions, and they go on this dark path. And so I wrote a book about a man who died while meditating in the deserts of Arizona while following the sort of fraudulent Tibetan Lama who taught that he could teach his students superpowers. And this guy, Ian Thorson, ended up dying while trying to meditate towards like levitation and walking through walls and getting these sort of angelic powers, as he said. So when I heard about Wim Hof, who was this Dutch fitness guru who had this training center in Poland, he made these claims that were really similar to the ones that killed my student, and that I just written was actually working on a book about at that time. And he said that he could learn to control his body temperature at will, learn to control his immune system, and thrive in extreme environments. And I heard this, and I was like, this guy is going to get people killed. Like I've seen other people die on these paths. And I wanted to get ahead of anything happening. And so I flew out to Poland with the idea to debunk him, to show that we have another fraudulent guru out here. But when I got there, because I'm an investigative journalist, because I'm an anthropologist, because I have basic ethics, I am not going to just go trash someone simply because I think that I'm suspicious of them. I have to give them a chance. So I went and I did his routine, and which is, the first thing that you do is you stand in the snow, just bare feet. And I was coming from Los Angeles at the time, so we were talking warm, palm trees, all that great stuff. I'd lived in India before. I liked heat. And probably more than anyone else, I really liked heat. But he convinces me to stand in the snow just for 5 minutes on the first day, just to feel what that was like. And predictably, it felt terrible. It just was horrible experience in my feet. They were burning, like it felt like they were burning, and I had to run inside after only 5 minutes. And I was well on my way to being like, yeah, this guy's a sham. But that's, of course, the natural response to have for the first time that you're doing this. And so he said, that's cool. Don't worry about it. And you keep doing the breathing method. And so he teaches me this breathing routine where you hyperventilate and then you hold your breath, and you hyperventilate and hold your breath, and you're holding your breath with no air in your lungs. And I'm doing these repetitions, and all of a sudden I'm holding my breath for, I think, like 2 minutes at a time at that point, which is longer than I'd ever held my breath before, and my lungs were empty. And they said, okay, do this again, but now hyperventilate and now do push-ups. Now, I am not an unfit guy, but I'm not fit either. I'm not like an endurance athlete or anything. And I knew I could do about 20 push-ups normally. And I tested that before I'd come. And so then I did his hyperventilation routine, and then I held my breath with no air in my lungs. I did push-ups, and I did 40 push-ups. It had doubled in the matter of like 15 minutes. I doubled the amount of push-ups I could do, which was shocking. It showed me that he had some way of modulating the physiology. And then the next day I went outside and I stood in the snow, and it didn't hurt as much. In fact, I lasted 10 minutes before that sort of pain and like intolerable experience happened. And then I kept doing this, and by the end of the next day I was staying there for 30 minutes, and then 45, and then an hour in the snow. And I'm just wearing, picture me just in a bathing suit, bare-chested, bare feet in the snow in Poland in the winter that stopped Napoleon, in the winter that stopped the Nazi army. And here I am standing in the cold doing this. And we meditate on the snow in like a snowbank, and the snow melts around me. And we end the week with me walking up a mountain in Poland for 8 hours, wearing just boots and a swimsuit and a hat, and I'm burning up the whole time. I don't get cold at all.
How did you have the faith? Because you went over there hoping to expose another sham artist. How did you have the faith to follow each step of the way, knowing it's not going to get you killed?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question, because I look back at now and like, was I really dumb to do this? But I think it's incremental, right? You see, the first day you're just standing in the snow and it hurts, but the second day it hurts a little less. And I do remember trepidation, especially before the final ascent of the mountain. I was like, oh, do I really want to do this? I don't need to do this to write the story, but I just wanted to give it a chance. And of course, we were hiking with I had a backpack with like a coat in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had some safety gear that I could get to, but I didn't need it. And I think, and we were also it was a ski slope, so it was there were safe places that I could get to if it started to fall apart. So, but I didn't end up needing that. But there is fear, and actually there's still fear. This is so funny. I've been doing this for a long time now. And if I'm doing a bare-chested hike up a mountain in Colorado, which I'm like, that's still very cold. And before I go, I go and I leave the car, I'm still like, is it still going to work? I know it worked before, but is it still going to work? And it always does. But I don't think that maybe it's that overcoming the fear, which is the same thing as turning the faucet from warm to cold, right? You still have to get over a little hump every time. And that maybe that's part of the training, is also recognizing that there's fear there.
Yeah, and I think it can be. It can be a very healthy fear. So it kind of shortcuts the whole thing. And I want to come back to some of the hacking that's going on here and really talk about that. But really, there's something about being in touch. I remember reading another Native American book, probably also about the turn of the last century, which was talking about when Native Americans were being westernized and they started having to wear jeans and other clothes that we wear in the West. And they were saying, I couldn't feel the air. I couldn't feel my connection to the world. And what you're talking about is flipping, as we get on later on, to a master switch, using it a different way here, but of connecting to the natural world. Something happens and we feel more alive, and it makes some sense to us.
Right. I mean, we have these bodies that are very attuned to the environment around them. Like the sensations that come in don't only come in through our eyes and our ears and our nose and our lips. We have all of these nerves through our skin, and we do cut them off when we insulate ourselves. And it's not to say that we should all be walking around in loincloths. That's not necessarily the what I'm proposing here.
Interesting image, though.
But it's a great image. But giving stimulus and understanding that our bodies are part of the environment that they inhabit is very important. And it used to be that we thought of the key to health as a mixture of diet and exercise. You eat right and you exercise right, and you're going to be healthy and fit. But it turns out that that's not true, right? I mean, if you are like many, many Americans and you have that spare tire coming up around your waist, it's really hard to exercise that off. Like, it's not easy to run off a potbelly. That's because the body would much rather burn muscle tissue for energy than it would that fat. And here's the reason for that. It's because that fat isn't there for caloric energy to fuel your muscles. That fat is there because it's stored heat energy. And the way you burn fat is you get cold. And your body will say, okay, now that we're cold, we have mechanisms to generate heat, and it literally burns the white fat for immense amounts of heat energy through what biologists would call thermogenesis, and it occurs in a site called brown fat or brown adipose tissue, which is what babies are born with, and every baby is born with brown adipose tissue because babies, you can think of this sort of fat roly-poly baby, right, newborn, and they have a very high surface area to mass ratio, which means they lose heat much faster than you or I would. They also have very, very weak muscles and a weak digestive tract. And you and I generally will heat ourselves through the process of digestion, through circulation, and through muscle movement. That's how we keep a steady body temperature of 98.6. But babies don't have that opportunity. So the only way they survive is by directly metabolizing those fatty rolls in their body and burning it for heat energy through brown fat. Now, until 2007, most American physicians believe that brown fat disappeared as you reach adulthood, that it just went away. And they only discovered in 2007 because of cancer screening. People with cancer would go to something called a PET-CT scan, and they'd be looking for tumors by putting a radioactive dye into their bloodstream, and then tumors which are very active, they're sort of like are constantly growing, would light up in a PET-CT scan. But also, they would find that there was this other weird area in the thorax and the shoulders that would also light up, and they couldn't explain what those blobs of energy were. And it turns out that as we reach adulthood, we still have a little bit of BAT. And it turns on in those scans because those rooms where the scans are very cold. And so your body is trying to passively heat itself up by using BAT. It's just not doing it very efficiently. It turns out that BAT does not go away for people if they're constantly exposed to cold throughout their life. You can actually maintain and even build up levels of BAT if you jump into ice water, if you get snow, if you take cold showers, if you do things to tell your body, hey, it might be cold in the future. Maybe we should have a method of dealing with it. But if you don't give it any stimulus, it just goes away because your body's like, well, we haven't had to use this for the last 20 some odd years. We'll be fine without it. And it doesn't want to waste the energy by generating BAT.
So that BAT has some big advantages to it, and I played around with a lot of cold weather activities. I don't get sick the way that people get sick around me. I have more energy, and it seems like I can eat like a racehorse. Generally speaking, how can we boost BAT, and what have you seen?
Yeah, well, it's funny. When I was in Poland doing this exercise, we were eating Polish food. Right, we were, this is pierogies, this is kielbasa. These are all the big fatty, oily foods out there. But I was also doing the cold training, and I actually lost 7 pounds of fat while I was there because I was eating a ton of energy. And it's just because I was cold, and my body was okay. I need to metabolize. I need to do this, and it's really not very hard to build up BAT. And you can just take cold showers. You can roll in the snow. You can do these short exercises where you're in the cold. Like if you want to, if you're in New York, right? So it's cold there right now. You can go for a shirtless run. Maybe you put some shoes on, right? Shirtless run for a mile or two, and your skin's going to get very cold, and your nerves are going to be like, oh, it's cold out here. I'm going to have to start thinking about generating some way of metabolically dealing with this new weather that we're encountering, and you'll build it up super fast. And the reason for that is because our species, when we went out of Africa and we started colonizing the whole planet, the people who survived were the ones whose bodies changed fast, right? It wasn't like the person whose body was like, oh, well, there's going to be a snowstorm in July. I bet, it's July now. It's going to come in November. I guess I'm going to start building up BAT now. It's like, no, it's November. The snowstorm's coming tomorrow. I'm going to start building it now because I don't want to die tomorrow. And so we still have that ability from our ancestors because we've only had modern heating and modern lighting and all this comfort for about 150 years. That is nothing on an evolutionary time scale. So I was able to get it back by hanging out in Poland for a week and then come back and you start stimulating yourself. You jump into that 50-degree lake that you said. Your body's just going to do it because that's what it needs to do. That's what it's designed to do.
It seems to be another piece of this, and maybe we'll jump into Rob Pickles and physiology here in a second, which is that something you are learning through this process is intensity seems to make a difference. I know for myself, more important than the duration that I spend in the cold, like adapting this fall, going shirtless, running around as well. If I went for shorter bursts, no matter how cold it was, but intense, my adaptation seemed to be much faster.
Right, and that's just because your body's working harder in this environment. So you add fuel into your body to go make changes, and it's the same idea with high intensity interval training, which is now a very big fitness movement. And the idea for HIIT workouts is that instead of training for a marathon by running more and more miles, so you're logging 100 miles a week or 200 miles a week of just running, that's the way we used to train for marathons. But now what people do is say, no, instead we're going to run a shorter distance, but we're going to do sprinting at our absolute maximum velocity. for 30 seconds or a minute, and then, sort of recovery, and just keep on doing these sprints, which totally wear you out so fast because you're just operating at your very highest level. But if you do that, you actually gain an endurance effect too. And someone I interview in the book, Brian McKenzie, sort of is one of the pioneers for this. Mm-hmm. And he's mixing Hoff breathing and cold techniques now too, because those also give you this edge. And instead of training at 100% of your level, you can actually train at a little bit more than 100%, like at 104% or 105%, because of the way the breathing works. Remember how I did these 40 push-ups without breathing? That was above what I could physically do. And that's because it's a long metabolic story for why that works. But basically, you're blowing off CO2 out of your system so that you don't hit that gasp point earlier. But you're also increasing the oxygen saturation in your blood to 100% as you do it. And you usually run about 97%. Mm-hmm. So now all of a sudden, you mix the HIIT workouts with the Wim Hof breathing, and you're doing a 104% HIIT workout, which means that you're going to run endurance even better than you had before.
Awesome. I love it. When I was reading a section in your book about some of these early hacks that these pioneers like Brian were doing. I was one of the kids at 16. I was racing bikes, trying to make it to the Tour de France. And I remember the year I first went to nationals, I was eating baking soda before mixed with water before my big races. And the hardest thing was keeping it down, but I was trying to buffer.
Right. Yeah. And that's what Rob Pickles did too in the book. You're trying to hack your body by giving yourself just a little bit more energy, but at the expense of probably explosive diarrhea. Yeah. I mean, probably that's not what your body's designed for.
Over time, I gave up with it because the amount of stomach discomfort I felt was outweighing the potential positive benefits. Maybe you can share with us what your workout, because you met with Rob, and maybe you can tell us about meeting with Rob, and then you developed kind of a protocol to test over time and see how you changed.
Right. So Rob Pickles was the lead physiologist at Boulder Sports Medicine Center, which has now changed its name to CU, Center for Sports Medicine. In July, or maybe it was June, when I started writing the book and doing the research, I said that I was going to do a test on my metabolism over the course of the research, which was about 6 months. Mm-hmm. And to do this, I needed to know what my metabolism was first. So I got a baseline. And I had not been doing any training for probably about a year before this. And I went with Rob, and he sort of measured my baseline metabolism, which basically said I was a pretty ordinary guy. I burned carbohydrates first, and then only after exhausting those would I burn fat. Now, which is the opposite of what an endurance runner or endurance athlete wants. You want to burn fat, which is a reliable energy source, in order to go longer. So no one was shocked by those results. And then I decided that for the whole course of the research, I would keep my exercise routine the same, which was about 3 times a week. I would do like a 3-mile run or a swim or a hike, something that was moderate exercise, but nothing special. And then I would do a Wim Hof inspired workout, which is modified from what he teaches to about only 15 minutes a day, which involved me hyperventilating, which is not like the uncontrolled, panicky hyperventilation, but looks more like this. For about 30 breaths.
Okay.
And then I would let all the air out of my lungs and then hold that for as long as I could. And then when that was done, you do a 10-second recovery breath where you take about half a breath in, and then you repeat the cycle. And, you'll get dizzy, your fingers might tingle. There's all sorts of pretty ordinary physiological reactions that happen to this. But the first time I'll hold my breath for a minute, and then the second time I'll hold my breath for 2 minutes, and the third time I'll hold my breath for 3 minutes, which is a pretty fast increase, but that's the workout. And then at the end of that, I will do one more round of breathing, and then I'll do breathless push-ups. So I'll have no air in my lungs, and I would do 50 push-ups that way. And then I'd go about my normal routine, maybe make breakfast or whatever. And then when I take a shower, it'll be a cold shower. Or maybe it'll be hot and then cold. And then whenever I got the chance, I would go jump in some cold water or whatever, maybe just some because I like that. It's really fun for me to do. Now, at the end of 6 months, after I did the research and I'm meeting all these great people, inspiring athletes and scientists, and of course with Wim, at the end of it, I got my metabolism measured again by Rob, and he showed that not only did I increase my endurance by a whole stage. So I hit my VO2 max, which is your absolute exhaustion point. I could do an extra stage on his stress machine doing that. But I also had become a fat burner. I had changed from being a primarily carbohydrate burner to a primarily fat burner. And he was actually amazed by this because he expected like zero change in my physiology. And he said, no, it was like I had added 7 hours of exercise, of cardio exercise to my routine every week. But all I had done was add 15 minutes a day. So it was a huge, huge difference. And it showed exactly how efficient it is to use the environmental training of the cold showers and then this sort of breathing meditation, which helps with your lung capacity and your sort of ability to metabolize in general, and also modulates your fight or flight response. And he was amazed by that. Now, some things didn't change. He expected that my lactate production, which is sort of the when your muscles feel sore, he expected that to go down in a corresponding way. But it turns out I still produce 8 times the amount of lactate as an ordinary person. And he was like, I don't know why that is. And I'm like, I don't know either. So it doesn't change everything. But seriously, there were some very amazing results.
A couple of things that are coolest to me. First off, I can even picture you just doing the 30 breaths and see your body temperature going up. You're just cranking up I visualize when I do something like that, I visualize a flame in my belly sort of inflating a hot air balloon, and you're going, and that's what you're doing. But later in the book, you talk about people going to train with Wim Hof who have physical conditions. And one of the huge conditions, or one of the conditions so many listeners have right now, are blood sugar challenges or diabetes. I was fascinated by this. And I can see when you're talking about switching over to fat burning, how this could make a major difference.
Absolutely. And so diabetes is one of the illnesses that seems to be very treatable with environmental conditioning, which is and also every autoimmune illness seems to be helped by sort of environmental conditioning. And what happens is if you're cold, since you're metabolizing fat and you're sort of getting rid of that spare tire, you're also modulating insulin production. And there was this study by a Dutch researcher named Wouter van Marken Lichtenbelt, who was I love Dutch names. Right? He lived he's in Holland. And what he did is he brought 10 or 12 sort of obese diabetic men and put them in a cold room for 2 or 3 weeks. And they were not there every day. They weren't there all day. They were there for only 3 hours a day. And it was at 52 or 55 degrees. So pretty cold. And at the end of this study, which is 2 or 3 weeks, he brought them out and he measured their insulin resistance. It had improved by 54%, which means just being cold, whatever the magic and the physiological responses to the cold were, basically reversed diabetes for them. And it's only because their bodies were able were using energy in a different way. They were activating their metabolism instead of keeping themselves warm in their ordinary way.
It's fascinating because it makes me think when I hear you saying that, it's allowing the body to do what it knows how to do best rather than inhibiting it artificially.
Right, exactly. It's just getting in touch with your environment. And it's interesting to think about diabetes as an energetic disease. It's a physiological it's because you have too many inputs partially. I mean, there's also genetic components to this as well, and it's a more complex issue than I'm probably making it right now. But it's too much caloric energy coming in and not being able to process it efficiently, and too many sugars in your body, and just modulating the environment really, really helps. You should still definitely cut out sugar, because sugar is not good for you. Doctors call diabetes sugar cancer quite frequently. But also the environment will help you deal with the excess energy that insulin. Insulin's basically just a buffer for it. It's just trying to oh my God, we've got too much sugar. What are we going to do with it? And just douses it. but like with any drug, you get resistance after you use it too much, and you're overusing insulin, which is the problem. And the cold helps modulate that.
Let's talk about what you just said about energy and what to do with our energy. And maybe we even double back a little bit on meditation, kind of from a Zen surfing perspective, because it was mind-blowing. And I've been reading about Laird for years and his pool routine, and I've seen that Tahitian vacuum cleaner of a wave. Mm-hmm. Take us down this road for a minute, if you could.
So Laird Hamilton was actually, I had never heard of Laird before I was doing this book. I was like, I need to find some athletes who are using environmental conditioning to become better. And a friend of mine said, wait, you don't know who Laird Hamilton is? I'm like, no clue. Who is he? And this is actually a common problem for me. I'm actually pretty out of touch with like popular culture. And it turns out that Laird Hamilton is probably the most preeminent surfer on the planet, known for surfing something called the Millennium Wave, which is off a reef off of Tahiti called Tiapu, is the largest regular wave on the planet. And I don't know, it's something like 60 or 70 feet high, which it just makes a human like a little ant. And Laird was the first person ever to surf this thing, and you can go to see the viral video on YouTube. And
I'll jump in for a brief second, because he actually, the hydraulics behind this wave, it builds up so fast they had to put his hand in front of him to keep from getting sucked up the wave, which is the exact reverse from what I understand of how you would surf anything.
Right. If you think about how normally a surfer goes, that they have their hand behind the board on the water behind them to give them stability. But because the wave is so tall and all of that mass of the water is sucking up, there was an upward current that was so much that he had to tip forward on the board to counteract it. I mean, that is mind-boggling for a surfer, because that's how you fall off on surfing, is you fall off the front of the board. You don't generally fall backwards. And it was just because of all the powers of the earth that changed the physics that anyone was used to. But he just knew instinctually, because surfers are often very in touch with the water, very in touch with the environment, because they're in the water all the time. And that's why surfers, I think, really are drawn to these methods, because they also have to deal with the cold. Like, even if you're in Hawaii and the water is like 70 degrees, which is pretty warm, but if you're in 70-degree water for 8 hours, your body temperature is going to drop to hypothermic levels. So they love this Wim Hof training because it puts them in a place where they can stay out there for longer. And so Laird had studied the Wim Hof method on his own for a little while. He had never met Wim at that point. And so when I called him up, I was like, hey, I'm doing a book on Wim Hof. I hear you like ice. He was like, oh my God, you have to come over and hang out with me and we'll talk. And so I flew out to LA, and it's a bizarre sight. You know, he's married to Gabrielle Reese, who was a famous volleyball star in the 90s growing up. And you get to his training center, and it's like all celebrities hanging out there. It's like the coolest workout, you know, in the LA area, and everyone just sort of shows up if you're a celebrity. And so I show up, and it's like John McGinley, who is the actor in Scrubs, who was sort of the older doctor in Scrubs, also in Platoon. And Orlando Bloom. So I'm in a sauna with Orlando Bloom. And it's just sort of that's the Hollywood crowd that's there. But more interesting than that celebrity stuff is what he is teaching, which is that it's what I was saying before about HIIT workouts. He was able to on dry land, do this high intensity interval training with using rapid breaths and then exercising at your absolute highest level. And then just alternating between that. And then he finishes up with ice baths in the middle to sort of help recovery as he goes. And then he has these underwater workouts, which is, it needs to be pointed out to your listeners. You don't mix the Wim Hof breathing with underwater anything ever, because it can lead to what's called shallow water blackout, where you don't realize when a fainting episode is going to come on. And actually, a lot of people have died doing mixing these two techniques. So don't do it.
And I'll add to that, because I lived in Hawaii for over 3.5 years. That's where I heard about Laird. I lived in Maui, and I was doing a lot of this training in fairly shallow water. And just as an intuitive thing, I decided to stop at some point. I said, because you just don't know when that switch, even as a highly trained athlete, when that switch may flip on you.
Right. And it's fairly common to pass out doing the Wim Hof breathing. Not the 15-minute one that I do is not very common, but as you do a longer, like an hour-long thing, it's easy to sort of forget where your gas point is, and more importantly, where your faint point is, because the body only detects carbon dioxide. So you can't detect the oxygen levels in your blood. The body's just not designed to do that. It can only detect the poisonous byproduct of respiration, which is CO2. So since the Wim Hof breathing blows off all your CO2, if you say, and there's two ways to do the breathing. There's a breath out retention, where your lungs are empty, and there's a breath in retention, which will give you the ability to do an exercise longer. Like you can do more push-ups with breath with full lungs. However, when you do full lungs, because you have blown off all the CO2, your body doesn't detect the oxygen change as efficiently, and your also blood pressure is higher because your lungs are full, and you can just pass out. And there's just no warning. And I've done that a couple times when I was like, oh, how many push-ups can I do? And I'm going to get my absolute maximum. I hit 80, and then, which is a lot, right? But then I hit 80 and I was boom out, and I just banged my head on the wood floor, which is unfortunate. A little bruise on my forehead. But if I was underwater trying to see how long I could hold my breath underwater, that would have come and I would have died. It would have been a very bad thing. Or at least if I wasn't rescued, I would have died. And that happens occasionally at Laird's workouts. There's something they call going floppy, which they're sort of very vigilant about now because they're more aware of these dangers.
Yeah, I guess is it called a bloomer then?
They call it bloom out because Orlando Bloom is sort of like the key, the most known culprit of that, because he does these Laird workouts pretty constantly and pushes himself to his absolute limit and finds it far too frequently. So, but he's doing it around people who are basically the best swimmers in the world, so he's being rescued fairly regularly. I don't think it's the right way to do it. I never saw him pass out, so I've only heard this through secondhand. But so what Laird will also do is like underwater weight training. So he won't do the hyperventilation, but he'll jump down to the bottom of the pool with weights. It's a 12-foot deep pool, and then jump up with 40 pounds of iron in his hand, take a breath, and go back down, and do these over and over again, which are pretty intensive workouts. It's like a super squat plus water added to it. And working out underwater is really interesting because your heart rate is automatically suppressed when your face is in water. It's just a natural mammalian response. So you're still working at a very high level, but it's actually very low impact on your body because your heart doesn't get up, even though you're doing these exercises at a high level.
So what did you learn? Because you were talking to him, and he's very, from what I understand, very zen, very connected to the wave, and this is really about connecting to our environment. Did this, in a sense, start to bring you full circle in terms of your thinking about meditation, for instance?
So it's a hard question because my mind around meditation is certainly still. I still have this memory of my student and that warning that we can push things too far. And so I did this one thing with Laird where we broke the rules, right? We did the Wim Hof breathing, and then we did go do these underwater laps back and forth. And I'm pushing myself pretty hard here. And I think I did 3 or 4 laps underwater, getting to the point where I was almost out. And I get up to the top of the wall and sort of on this cusp of fainting, and I see in this sort of because the breathing is also a meditation. There's this visual side of it that you focus on, and you focus your mind on, which we haven't really talked about, but it's there. And so as I close my eyes, I see this burning red face with slits for eyes sort of show up in this meditation, and in this sort of passing out point, and it's sort of a transcendent experience. Where I see something which is sort of, it's very common to see things in meditation. You see colors, you see electrical things, people see different things. And what do those mean? Some people will say it's just random neurons firing and has no meaning. And some people will say it's a connection to your chakras or a connection to some other sort of spiritual ether. But we don't really know what that means, but it's alluring and it's really interesting, and they certainly happen, right? Regardless of what it means, we know that it happens and it's a real phenomenon. And so what you do is you focus on this, and whether or not something greater than myself or not, I'm going to remain agnostic on. But it's certainly interesting, and I think a lot of people do get spiritual solace out of these experiences, and I think that's really quite wonderful. But for me, and the reason why I think that it was really interesting to write this book is that these meditations are physical meditations, and then the mind is secondary to that. Whereas a Tibetan Buddhist meditation or Zen Buddhist meditation often starts at the mind and then goes to the body. But the Wim Hof stuff is the exact opposite. It triggers your body to force your mind to do different things.
It's something that my wife, Jessica, she's the producer of the show, and myself, we have been really drawn to recently. It's also something we've been teaching people with, not about the Wim Hof breathing, but we've been teaching that a path to, not to enlightenment, but to ease the mind, to take a spiritual journey. It really comes from the body first. When you get in touch with your body, things start to get into alignment.
Right. Mm-hmm. And absolutely true. And the beauty of this is that, so Tibetan Buddhists teach a technique called tumo, which you've heard of this if you think about a Tibetan monk meditating in the snow and melting all the snow around them. And I believe Drepung Monastery in Tibet used to have sort of their graduating ceremony in the Himalayas. Was that the monk would be in the snow in their red robes, and they would pour water on them, and then they meditate until the robes are dry. And so that's how you would graduate, and you'd be a really, and it's totally doable. But to get to that point, Tumo is like a 10-year process to really master Tumo, because you start with these visualizations of chakras and then of Sanskrit letters in your heart, and it's a very mental first, and then you get to the physical, and you learn the fire breathing, which I'm sure you've done, aspect of it. But with Wim's stuff, and the way he teaches it is like, forget the mind. The mind will catch up. First, we're going to trigger the body. We're going to trigger these neural and evolutionary responses that you have. We're going to dunk you in ice water, and you're just going to naturally, because of your fight or flight response, you're going to survive, and it's going to put you into that mental state. So it goes from sort of body to mind, although I actually believe body and mind are the same thing. But it's you trigger the body in order to start and kickstart the mind, and you get into this very, if you do this hyperventilation, it doesn't look like meditation. It looks like right. It looks sort of funny and looks sort of like you're exerting yourself a lot. But what the point of that is it puts you in this sort of like dazed trance-like state where your mind sort of turns off, which is also what you're trying to do with meditation.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! There we are.
Are there things that you're, to use it in the most positive term, geeking out on now, or that you've been excited to learn and explore because your Pandora's box has been blown way open?
Right. Mm-hmm. I'm getting very interested in other mismatch illnesses and mismatches between our biology and our technology. Like, evolutionarily speaking, the technology that we have today is so much more advanced than where our biology has had the ability to evolve and catch up. So I'm wondering how, for instance, GPS, in the 90s, I could navigate anywhere with a map and just my memory. But now I want to get across town and I turn on my GPS unit, and I've lost that ability to navigate the world because of GPS and because of that, how easy it is that I don't have to spend mental effort actually remembering something. Who would want to remember something when my phone can do it for me? So I'm curious about other things like that. For instance, the constant light that we have, light at the flip of a switch. There used to be a time when there was daylight would get shorter and longer, and then the light that you did have would come from a fire, which was orange, but now this light is blue and white. What is that doing to our endocrine system? What is that doing to that 200,000 years of biology that was formed by fire, that was formed by our presence of fire? How is that different now that we don't have fire? Now that we have fluorescent and things like that. So these are interesting me, and I think that there's just hundreds and hundreds of other ways that we have outsourced our bodily processes to technology. And some of them are great. Like, I don't want to get to a point where I'm like, don't do antibiotics, right? Antibiotics are bad for you because they're great. Because look what happened to the Native Americans, right? They were not exposed. I mean, they had very strong immune systems. They could handle different environments. But then in comes smallpox, in comes the flu and various other illnesses from Europe, and they get wiped out. So we do need Western medicine. But how much do we need it is a question. And how much does reliance on Western medicine also undermine occasionally our biology? And that's something that I'm exploring, and I don't have answers yet. And I may never get answers, but I'm interested in understanding it more.
Fascinating and awesome. And as somebody who, I dim down my lights at night, I've got flux on my computer so that I get all the screens yellow, and I'm totally with you on this. What would you tell parents to help their kids, or to start to expose their kids to more of a natural way so that they can support the physiology we came here with?
Well, I think that, so I'm not a parent, right? So I don't have kids, and it's hard for me to give parenting advice, especially when the parenting advice often will rely on things that sound crazy, which is putting your kid letting your kid, kids often will say, yeah, I'm going to go to school, but I don't want to put on my coat. And the parent will be like, you have to put on your coat. You're going to get a cold and get sick. And maybe the kid is actually right. Maybe the kid is warm already and they have a biology that is already working. Mm-hmm. And maybe don't send him out without like a coat available to him if he needs a coat or she needs a coat, right? But maybe let them also trust their biology, and because your kid's biology is different than your biology, which is already probably hobbled by the environmental cocoon we've been in. But your kid has an opportunity to keep that biology that they evolved with in a very good way. Now, when I mentioned brown fat, right? Mm-hmm. Brown fat's interesting, because we actually do lose it as we get older. And when we rebuild it, when we actually start to rebuild it because we expose ourselves to it, we don't build up brown fat, we build up something called beige fat, which is actually a different type of fat, which is actually recruited from our white fat and altered. Mm-hmm. But kids actually retain this other tissue called brown fat because they were born with it. And they won't lose it. And maybe it's even more powerful than the stuff that we can create. So I would say, to some degree, trust your children, but don't trust them all the way. Like, don't let them go out and get frostbite. Don't do something dumb, but let them have a chance to have a varied environment. And, we also live in a place that's very antiseptic, where people are not exposed to germs. And we also regulate children's time by giving them activities at scheduled times and things. But these are not natural. These are our culture expressing themselves on how the child is supposed to grow up and form. But we are biological beings that are able to thrive in many sorts of environments. And it doesn't need to be just the one that's thrown at them by civilization.
Woohoo! Thank you. Awesome. I don't want to give the whole story, but maybe you can share real briefly. And everybody, you're going to want to go out and get his book. It's a fascinating read. But can you?
Oh, and the cover is awesome too. Look at that.
Oh, the cover has Wim Hof on it.
No, it's not Wim Hof.
It's not Wim, because I'm looking at the shoulders, which don't look like Wim Hof's shoulders. Who is it then?
I have no idea. It's just some awesome dude.
Awesome looking dude who's about to dunk through a hole in the ice. So that's the disconnect, because I'm going, it's got to be Wim Hof, but the shoulders are just massive. The traps on this guy, putting himself into the water. What did you end up doing with Wim Hof or something? Go ahead.
Well, I tried to, part of this process was also seeing how my body could thrive in extreme environments. And at the end of the book, I'm building up to two big challenges. One is to do the coldest, most notoriously difficult obstacle course race. One of these things where you're jumping over barbed wire and, climbing over obstacles in England, while everyone else is in neoprene and I'm just in a bathing suit. And I do it and I'm burning up the whole time. And it's an amazing experience. And the other thing is I wanted to climb a mountain and really test myself in an extreme environment. And last January, I climbed up Mount Kilimanjaro in a bathing suit. And that's not even the exciting part. I did it, 5 times faster than basically anyone else does it. I didn't get a record, but I did it in a way, using the breathing method, able to, I think I pretty much demonstrated that you can counteract acute mountain sickness by using this breathing method.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And you would probably argue that you're anything but, you're just a normal person. You're not an elite athlete.
Oh my God, hell no. I mean, no, it's really funny because my wife is actually sort of an elite athlete. She works out all the time. She'll sometimes go to the gym 2 or 3 times, and it's just not my soul to do that. Like I like being physically active, but I'm not. But I would never make the statement that I'm a super athlete in any way. I'm just a pretty normal guy. I can do a few push-ups, but what I'm able to do, which is interesting, is control some of these fight or flight responses. I can control myself. I can control my body temperature, and I can endure extreme environments really well. And it's because I've worked on that part. And, if we talked about these 3, the pillars of diet, exercise, and environmental conditioning, I'm very good at the environment now.
How has, we got to start to wrap things up, but I'm just so fascinated by this. How has this affected your ability to handle stress on a day-to-day basis?
That's hard to say. If you start the day with the breathing method, you feel really good, and the day seems to just go better. I still can get stressed out, right? I can still get sick. I actually have a little bit of a cold right now, and it's not like this stuff makes you immune to the ravages of the world. But what it does is it gives you more malleability, and you might recover quicker, and you can endure these stimuli better. And I feel even though I don't have this crazy workout regimen that my wife does, I still feel very strong, and I think that's good.
Awesome. Thank you. 2 or 3 quick wrap-up questions. First off, question we like to ask all our guests just before the end. What personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Free time. The ability to think of time as my own, and not be motivated by the finances or the money, but just being able to not be controlled by sort of a someone else's schedule. That is like every day. I love being a writer. It's just such a good life, and I'm so blessed to be able to go on these adventures. Right? I hung out on Kilimanjaro. I went to England, and I feel like I have such a blessed life because of that. And every day is just amazing.
Awesome. Thank you. And since we're always encouraging our audience to follow their heart and to find their passion and go after it, you're someone who's clearly done that.
Absolutely. I was talking with some college students earlier today, and they asked me if I ever thought of quitting my job. And I said, quitting my job would mean having to get a real job. And I could never do that. I would probably get fired from any real job I ever had.
But you're following your heart, and that's awesome. Woohoo! Where can people go to find out more and to find your beautiful book?
Well, I have a website, scottcarney.com, SCOTTCARNEY.com. Google brings me up. I have a Facebook page for both me and for the book. I mean, there's Twitter. I mean, really anywhere that you might expect me to show up, I have tried to get there, Instagram, whatever. I have an audiobook, so if you really liked listening to me, I even have a better mic for the audiobook, and I recorded it in that closet. But it came out really awesome. You can download that on iBooks or Audible or anything like that. But also, support your local bookstore. They're being beaten up by Amazon, and they're great people. But also, there's Amazon, and it's super cheap right now. It's like $16, and that you can't beat a deal. So pick up the book, read it, and more importantly than that, challenge yourself to think about you in the environment and what that means. And that's really what I want people to get out of this is to think that the way we inhabit the world and this penchant for comfort that we have is not necessarily always healthy. Sometimes you can be too comfortable, and that can lead to bad things.
Amen. On that note, you may have already covered them, but any last words of wisdom you want to share with people?
No, follow your heart. Just live a great life.
Thank you, Scott. This has been a lot of fun. It's been fascinating. It's going to challenge me even more on this journey. I tend to put a mantra in front of this, and it's my way, which is kind, gentle, easy, good. While I'll expose myself to incredible elements to watch the body change and geek out on it, I do it with nice, tiny baby steps. So I'm kind to myself each step of the way.
I think that's great. And totally start, if you're doing this stuff, go slow at first. I mean, you can work your way up to big things, but, don't do anything that's dangerous. Don't start being like, oh, I can go hike across the Arctic in my bathing suit. Maybe don't start there, right? Maybe start, with a cold shower and work up to that. But it won't kill you. That's what doesn't kill us. That's the name of the book. Good title. Good.
It's awesome.
Look at that. That's pretty good looking.
Woohoo!
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Scott. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get what doesn't kill us, and make yourself stronger, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you, Scott. This was awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!